Good morning, everybody. Hope you can all hear me. I've got everything. I think I've got everything right today. Last week was a little bit of a disaster when it came to doing something that I'd never done before. But that's what the show's all about. Trying new things, seeing things work. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But we can redeem just about anything that happens in the show. So what problem we had last week was I'll just take this out of the pack, which I should have done earlier. I had my rebate cutter set up with a little bearing. Okay, so I had that on there. Now, when I took the small bearing off so that I could cut the complete depth of my rebate in the back of the cabinet and put the other one on, excuse my big fat pudgy fingers, what we found was that there wasn't enough height to give us, just pan across to there, Penny, to give us a reasonable sort of a cut in our rebate and have the bearing run along the inside of it. Now, somebody mentioned, why don't you use a fence? Well, the problem with the fence is that they couldn't fit it on the inside, and then the comment came back, well, why didn't you cut them beforehand? The problem with that is, if I had cut that rebate beforehand, I would have had a gap here when I fit in the back panel, which means I'd have to do a repair. I didn't want to do a repair because I've got this really nice shape on the back here. I would have had the same on that side there, right? So I would have had a gap there and a gap there. So what I did was got myself a second bearing. Now, the screw in the rebate cutter is quite long. You can see it's got a reasonable amount of length on it, and fitted the two together like that, and that worked a treat. Okay, so I managed to be able to get a little bit more thickness on there, and I had the top edge of that that bearing running around the inside of the thing. You've given it a really clean cut. So when I adjusted up and down, I got the result that I wanted. So this is the result that I have now. Let's put those aside. So if we go back to here, you can see I have this lovely trench all the way around the inside of it. Okay, now I had a little cut here, but that doesn't matter because that's going to be covered over, and it shows me where my trench is. So a little bit of place to put a little bit of glue, but everywhere else it's quite nice right around the whole of the inside. So all I've got to do now is fit my back. Now last week, let's go on to here. Last week I showed you how I was going to plane and fit without having to go to my vise. Now, I've got a H&T Gordon pattern maker's vise on my bench over there, but it means I've got to shift everything around and change things about, and that's a little bit difficult, particularly when I'm working most of the time on my bench here. So if you don't have that sort of thing available to you, and that's what our shop is all about, it's about doing things professionally, making things look really, really nice with very little tools. Now, somebody said to me once before, why don't you just rip things down on your table saw? I don't own a table saw. We don't have one. There's not enough space here to put it. So I don't have one. I do everything by hand when I have to cut things. I have a drop saw, I have a band saw, and I have a thicknesser. And that's basically all that I have, and a drum sander, of course, to do the task that I want to do. And there are a lot of people around Australia, or overseas too, I suppose, that don't have the facilities or the room to actually fit lots of different tools in. So I try to sort of do everything close handy. Majority of my work is done on this small table that we develop. The Gifkins router table, it's a flat surface, does the job nicely, it's sturdy, and it's quite a good tool to use. So I sort of spend a lot of time sort of making jigs and doing things like that, which helps in my skill level as well. Making jigs and doing things that you know, simplify the whole process of getting stuff to work properly. So that's what we're all about. I thought sort of there are a few people who were you know, questioning why I didn't do various things. Well, I'm all for helping the person who doesn't have a lot of tools. You might be budget conscious. There might be lots of different reasons why you don't have tools. The majority of it is budget and room. And we've got a small workshop, you can see it's not very big. And of course our budget is not very big either. I'm not allowed to have a lot of money to spend on tools, but anyhow.
Rubbish.
Oh, okay, I'm getting a rubbish there. So
We plan for it.
we have to plan to get the tools. So if you're in that sort of boat, well then, if you have a look at Fix-It, he's of that same ilk. Fix-It Fingers is of the same ilk. He's a budget conscious person and also a room conscious person. So have a look at his.
He's always coming up with clever ideas.
Yeah, he's always coming up with something clever to do. So anyway, what we've got here, and here's another little thing. I made a mistake many years ago, and I bought all of these tiny little clamps, and I misread it when I ordered them. And these are EZS 11x4s. They're perfect for this sort of thing. So what I'm doing is holding here, and the cute little clamps actually do a really good job just for a small clamp. So, you know, they can go from there. Now, the reason I put this up here, I've got off the story again. The reason I put this on here is just to show you that you can build yourself a sort of a clamp that will hold your timber or hold something steady while you're working on it. Now I've got it set up here because what I want to do is I want to take a little bit off, fit it into my trench and into the back of the cabinet and take it from there. So I'll just undo that. I better check to see what I have to take off first. So this is the back and this is my top. So I'll just go to here. You can see the bottom of the trench is towards me, so I need to have a look at that. And it almost fits spot on. I did a little bit of work over the weekend. Well, I've promised I'd never do this, but I had to do this one because I made a mess of last week's show a little bit. And that fits pretty close. I've just got to take a little bit off here, and I'm just going to show you how I'm going to do that. Now, normally I would use, set this up. Yeah, funny little garrets. They're a bit awkward, but they do the job, these little. Okay, now normally I would get my plane. I'm not going to plane this, but normally I would have the plane and I would plane off what I need to take off. Of course you put a measurement on it, but I've only got to sand a tiny little bit here. It's just touching here. And so what I need to do is just sand off a little bit here so that I've got 100 grit sandpaper on the sanding block. And I generally use my sandpaper exactly the same way that I would do if I was using a file or anything like that. I stand properly behind the tool. Don't lean on anything while I'm doing it. I use two hands on the tool itself. And all I'm going to do is just take a little bit off there, like so. smells really nice because it's camphor laurel. Has that lovely smell. Now you can take a little bit of a chamfer off the inside, not the outside, the inside of the box, because that'll give you a gap around. If I took a chamfer off the inside of the box, this is the inside panel, it would show up on the inside of there. I don't want to do that. I want a nice and flush there. But on the outside, not so much. Just a tiny little bit. And okay, it's going to have a little gap on it, but that's okay. It's at the back of the cabinet, and I want a little bit of movement as well. So you can take a little bit off the inside, take a little bit off the outside, just to make that nice and even. And I might just give the end of it a bit of a sand as well. How cute are these little clamps? And they do the job nicely. And just take a little bit off there, just make sure it's nice. There's no furry bits on it, that's all. This one's a bit the same. Incidentally, the support that I'm using is actually the fence, my high fence that I use on the router table. So it's a tool that actually can be used for a number of purposes. And this is one that I use it for. It also means I don't have to go wandering around my workshop, even though it's not very big. I still don't have to wander around it. Okay, let's see if we can get a fit here. Beautiful. Okay, I don't need this anymore, so I'll get rid of this. You can see it's got a really nice fit on there. And so what I'll do now is I'm going to glue that in place, and then I'm going to nail it in. Now, nails, I could get some tacks and I could tack that in there, not a problem. Just knock it in with my thing. But I'm going to upskill a little bit. I've got myself one of those, a very cheap little brad nailer. Okay. Now, this is from the Big Green Store. It's not an expensive tool. It's excellent for things like this. The cabinet is going to be a tool itself, because it's going to hang on the wall and look after my chisels. And you can use a variety of different nails with it. So depending on what you're doing with it, I've got these sorts of things here. So little 15mm or 20mm, you can actually use a 25mm in it as well. And the tool is not very expensive, and it doesn't take a whole lot to run it. Now, it's not a battery operated tool. It's an air operated tool. So if you've got a compressor, it's very simple, very easy, and it's very, very quick. Now, I could get the hammer down and a few tacks and start knocking things about, but I'm not going to do that at the moment. And so I'm going to use my little nail gun. So as you can see, that is just quite a nice snug fit. Get rid of a few things like this. Now, I did cheat a little bit earlier by sanding it up and getting it nice and smooth, so that I don't have to sand it later. But so all I'm going to do now, I'm going to run some glue around the inside of that. I'm going to pop that in there. Don't want too much glue in there because I don't want to squeeze out into the cabinet. Otherwise, I've got to do a bit of cleanup, which I don't like doing. So this is what we go. How are we going with questions at the moment? I need to answer. We're trying to answer some of the questions that come up on the show, during the show. Generally, I'm too focused on what I'm doing to get to look at the questions, but please do answer them. I know that I know you all answer for yourselves occasionally, but yeah. So don't be afraid to ask a question, because there's always somebody on the show who has the answer. Might not necessarily be me or Pam, but we try to make the effort to at least help you out. You'll notice I'm not putting a lot of glue in here. I don't want a lot in here. I could get the squeegee out and squeeze the whole lot in and just run the brush over it, but I find this is a better technique. A little bit more control over what happens with the glue by brushing it in. And as you can see, there's not a lot in there. There's enough there to hold it. Remember, the panel is made up of 4 different pieces. It's not just a one piece. So your expansion is going to be a little out of control occasionally. So it's just got to make sure that you've got enough glue there to hold it, and I've just got to make sure I get it in the right way. Now, some would say, why do you need the nails? Well, eventually that timber will probably shrink a little bit, and that wouldn't be helpful at all. I did have a piece of cloth here somewhere. There it is. Wiping off any of my excess. Okay, so there we go. Right, now, nail gun. So what I need is my air hose. The one I'm using 15mm nails here because you need to be very, very careful with this. The thing we need to do is put a pair of earmuffs on the lathe pen. Thank you. I left them over there. I was working over there the other day. So earmuffs when you're using these, and make sure you've got something covering your eyes as well. Just want to check inside. That looks pretty good in there. as you can see, I haven't put stacks of nails in. I don't need stacks. All of the top and bottom of that's going to be covered by the French hook once it's fitted. Now it's sitting a little proud, and the beauty about my little nail gun is it punches the nail just below the surface. So if you have it set right, and it's got a little adjuster on the back of it so that you can adjust the force that it puts into it. So we get it through there, and when you look at the inside of the box, it's looking quite nice. A little bit of squeeze out there. It's a nice clean fit all the way around, and you can see a bit of squeeze out there too. So apart from that, there's the box with all of the little bits and pieces fitted nicely. Got great colour with the camphor in the back of it. So now what I want to do is I want to fit the shelf. Now with the shelf, what I spoke to you about earlier when it comes to the shelf was I wanted to put a shelf in that has a little feature along the front edge there. Right? And you can see on this one here it's quite dark. It shows the shelf and the front edge of the shelf. It's not very thick, it's only a few millimetres thick, the piece of timber. So I've made the shelf out of the same material that I made the sides of the cabinet out of, and added a darker piece to the front of it. Now this one here is camphor laurel, and I found a really dark piece of camphor to go on there, but it doesn't match the outside edge of the cabinet door, which is cedar. Right? Now I'm going to do the same feature on here by putting a bead around the outside, and I'm also going to put in some butterflies to hold the miters together. Now doors generally aren't made of, particularly these sort of workshop doors, are generally not mitered. Generally they're tongue and groove or mortise and tenon panels that run all the way through, but I thought I'd do something a little bit different. Now it's not going to get a lot of work apart from the fact you're just opening and closing it. It's not going to be battered and bashed and used in any particular way that it's going to cause sort of to damage. As well as that, we've got the locking butterflies in there as well, a technique which we use in our box making. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Right now, we'll do the, just shift my gun. Thank you. Okay. Now, when I made the shelf, what I did with it when I made it, I cut myself a piece exactly the same, which I used as my test piece to cut my dovetails on the end. Right? Now, once I cut the dovetails, once I'd done my test piece, I then cut the ends of the shelf so that it actually fits into the butterflies that I have on the cabinet. Now, the front piece has to be exactly the same. So what I did was, while I had it there, I cut myself a piece of cedar and did exactly the same on the end of that, so that we have the butterfly on the end of it. Now, why did I do a piece that wide? It's easier to hold it when you're cutting the dovetails. Okay, you can put it in a push block and push it quite nicely. The other question that was asked, why didn't you join that onto there first? And then cut the whole lot at once. And I thought, well, that was a good question. Why didn't I? Part of the reason is because I didn't have this available at the time. I had to get hold of it, and therefore I had to make up two pieces and fit them together. Besides that, if I couldn't find the right piece, I could put another piece of this in here and make it look quite nice, but I don't have to anymore. So there were lots of reasons why I didn't do that. So now back to my gluing. A little bit of glue here. Don't need a lot. You'll notice every time I do my gluing, I put the glue onto a panel and then work off the panel. I find that a lot easier. So we put a bit of glue in here. Don't want a lot. And we fitted all this last week because if you remember right, and if you go back to last week's show, you'll see that I've fitted it and had it looking quite nice. Now I don't want to glue anything across the back here. I may end up putting a nail or two in the back, but that's the back part. So it goes in that way. Make sure you mark everything as you fit it together. You'll notice I didn't put a lot of glue in that. I didn't have to. So it's just a matter of getting that tapped down. It's a reasonably snug fit. Fist mallet, correct. If you can't put it in with your fist, don't take to it with a mallet because obviously the joint doesn't work. Well, that's what I was told many years ago, so I tend not to use a mallet to put joints together. I find if you're hitting things with mallets to put joints together, somewhere along the line you've got to adjust your equipment so that you can fit the joints together nicely. You remember, timber expands, and if you're jamming things together with a mallet, you'll find that it's way too tight and doesn't work very well. So that fits in there quite nicely. And now what I did was I went to the bandsaw once I'd made this piece, and I just cut a piece off it to fit. Now it's going to be too thick, that's okay. So that'll just go on there like so, and it'll fit straight in there. And I'll glue that in place. So a little bit more glue. I tend to use Titebond 3 all the time. I don't sort of mix and match my glues. Although, I must admit, I was watching Dave Stanton a couple of weeks ago. He was using epoxy resin, and that really worked. So I bought some and had a little play with that, and it came out beautifully. That's what I joined the mallet together. Remember, I built the mallet the other day. I've joined two pieces of timber together with epoxy resin. It came really, really nice. So just a little bit of gluing here. I'm always willing to learn something. If somebody wants to teach me, I'm happy to listen and watch. A little bit of glue in there. And then this is my piece that goes on it. Okay, a little bit of squeeze out on there. And so there's my cedar feature on the box. Now as you can see, if you look at it there, you can see it's quite thick. So what I'm going to do now is plane that off. Now before today's show, I got out my plane. Now the one that I normally use is this big old thing. That it's a 5.5, and it's just way too big for this sort of task. And I thought, oh, I need something smaller. So in amongst all my other tools and things like that, I have 2 number 4s. Now these are quite a nice plane. Now this one, this number 4 has a fluted base. Okay, so it's a really nice plain thing. But look at the condition of it. It's in pretty poor condition. The blades are all rusty. They're not very sharp. And they've been lying around in my workshop or in somebody else's workshop for quite some time. And as you can see, the parts on it are not actually genuine parts. So in my other box of tricks, I had another one that was in that sort of condition. And so I spent all day yesterday refurbishing this one. Okay, and as you can see, it came up beautifully. It's a really nice little plane. It's nice to use. I sharpened it quite nicely, so it came up really, really well. And so that's what I'm going to use to plane off the excess on the top of here. So as you can see, you can, if you refurbish things, you can get tools to come up quite nicely. So I need a stop. So I'll just put my fence on here, something to put the block up against. A couple of clamps. And now, as you can see, that is tearing all the way across there. It's not because I've got the plane offset, it's just because the grain is fairly cranky in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it around like so. Strip these off here. And then clamp the box down. And that should work a little better. Ah, look at that. Oh. I'll just back that plane off a tiny little bit. When you check it, run your hand backwards that way and you can see the sheen, and then you can see the tooth across the front of it. Okay, so always run your hand backwards, don't run it forward, otherwise you'll cut yourself. And then bring your locking nut forward to hold it. That's better.
Then cutting thinner strips.
Big pardon?
Is that then cutting thinner strips?
Yeah. So I'm not taking so much off at once. You can see lovely shavings. There's nothing like the sound of a plane shh through the timber. Might put another clamp on that box. It's moving around a little bit. That's better. When you're using a plane, I often see people who are using a plane and they're having a bit of a play like this. There's no uniform cut all the way through your piece of timber. You need to be standing up and you need to be standing evenly balanced so you can get a nice easy stroke with the plane. And if you've got your plane set right, you can get these lovely shavings. I'm working with the grain. Come down straight once you get... You'll notice also that when I'm using a plane, I don't use a plane like that all the time. You can use it like that all the time. It's got a flat base. But I tend to sort of, if I'm going to take a lot of material off, I tend to use it like if you've seen a grader grading a road, they've got the blade on the tractor at an angle so that it starts here and it just sort of peels stuff away. This does the same if you hold your plane at a tiny little bit of an angle, and it actually planes. If you have it at a little bit of an angle like that, it actually peels the material away, and you can get a nice clean cut without any catches. This is looking really good. So it's just a matter of keep working on it until you get it. I sometimes like to do this because it's just good for the soul. So.
Cheap therapy.
I see a comment there about workshops being not very big. Yeah, sometimes we just don't have the space available. So I do speak to people often, and they say, "Oh yeah, I'm using one half of the garage, but I have to shift my car out every time I start work." It's a common problem. There, that is looking really good. So I just want to check that to see if it's flat still. Oh, nice. Perfectly flat. And so just refurbishing the plane, what I did with the plane is I got rid of all the rust off the side of it. You can see on the blade, it's all rusty. I still haven't done all the work on that. It was all rusty. All of this interior stuff here, all of the frog and the adjusting screw, it was caked up with weeks or years and years of work. So they do get very, very dirty. And being left lying around, particularly here on the coast, it was all rusty on the sides, so I sanded all of that up, planed all that off, and then I checked the bottom of it. And when I checked the bottom of it, I found that it wasn't flat. And you need to have a flat plane. It's not going to be flat now because the blade's sticking out there, but it'll show a little bit of light. But you need to get that flat as well. So I've got the blade set up a little bit. So you need to have that relatively flat as well, so you've got a really nice flat surface to work with. So you can get them and dress them up quite nicely. Now this one here, I imagine it's about a 1980 model. I'm not sure. I'm not over how old planes are and all that sort of stuff, but I think it's been around since about the 1980s, early 80s or something like that. Whereas the other one is even older. It's probably early 70s. So okay, I'm just going to have a drink. Going to give it croaky. This is my coffee. No, actually it's tea. Somebody said hard tea? Yeah, it's hard tea. Okay. So here we go. Just a little bit of flat work. So not a lot of sanding necessary. The plane's done the job. Now the beauty of this, if you just come in onto this one, Pammy, if you can. The beauty of this is it actually shows up the dovetail. Okay, so I've got the light timber and the dark and the feature piece. It's quite dark, and then when you look at the thickness of it, it's not very thick at all. Okay, it's quite thin. So just a lovely little feature, and that's the same sort of thing that I'm going to do with the door. Okay, so I'll have that sort of feature with the cedar, and I'm going to talk about the doors because we're basically up to that stage. And as you can see, lovely shavings. The plane has done a really nice job, and this is the sort of thing that you want to see in a workshop where you've got tools that are actually doing the work they're expected to do properly, not scraping things and tearing things. It's cutting things, so it looks quite nice. So in the bin. Okay, the door. One of the things that I would do here before I actually go to the door is I need to sand up the back of this, and that'll get sanded as well. That'll get sanded flat. I want the cabinet to have a flat back on it so that it fits on the wall nicely. I'm going to put a couple of strips of the French hooks that will cover up this top corner and this bit here, and but there's my little cabinet with its little feature. Okay, so we've got quite a bit of it done. It looks really nice now. It's starting to look like what we were trying to achieve. So it's going to come up with some real nice things. So now the door. We'll do the door first, and once we fit the door, we'll then look at fitting the drawer. Now the drawer is not going to be very big. It's not very deep. Doesn't have a lot of depth in it, but then we don't want a lot of depth in it. So this is where we're going with this. Get rid of all this stuff here. We don't need any of that anymore. Now, what I want is I want the door to come halfway across this panel here. Okay, so from the top, we'll take a measurement. Let's just pop into here. So from the top of the cabinet to halfway, I'll just get half of that and then put a mark on it so I've got a measuring point. So half of that, what have we got here? 15 mil, so 7.5. That's my centre. Now there's going to be a millimetre gap between the door and the drawer, so that we've got a small amount of space, and so therefore my cabinet door is going to be 47 millimetres. So 407 millimetres. Now if I cut it a little bit bigger, then I can adjust it to fit. Okay, so if I cut it to about 408, so that gives me that measurement. The measurement across, of course, is going to be from cabinet to cabinet, so 352 is good. Okay, so thereabouts, 352 is fine. Now, I cheated a bit. I just shift my lovely new plane that I've dressed up. These are the pieces for my door. Okay, just a sec. Get a bit dry during the show. Okay, so every now and then I've got to have a drink. Good morning, Bernard. How goes it? Glad you could make it today. Okay, so here's my panels for the door. So this is the way I'm going to make it. I've got to put, I want to put a frame around it, okay? And that cedar frame needs to be added before we actually get the thickness or the width of our runners and our rails. So what I have here, I've cut myself some camphor pieces, and I'm not concerned about faults. You can see in this one here there's a sap pocket. What I've done is I've just put a little bit of araldite in there just to hold it so that it doesn't fall out. The same applies to here. I've got a little sap pocket there. I'm just going to make sure that it's part of the feature and part of the cabinet. Instead of wasting the piece of timber, which I couldn't have done anyway, I've just sort of made it as part of the feature, and it doesn't hurt to have little features like that. So there's my top on the bottom, and then these two pieces go here. There's one there. This one's a very plain piece, but it's the side I'll have the hinges on. And this one can go that way. So there's my door frame, basically. Now what I want to do, here we go again, I want to add on a piece of cedar. So I've got this piece here which is cut exactly the same thickness, okay, same length, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this piece and this piece together. I'm going to join those together, and then I'm going to cut that down the middle and then adjust my size of my cedar. All right. Now there's 100 different ways of doing this. There's 100, like I say, there are stacks of ways of doing this. I have a particular technique that I do, and that's the one that I try to put on the show and give you some idea that there are different things and you can do things your way if you wish, but that's the way I'm going to do it. So what I'm going to do is just add those two bits together. I've got another piece here of cedar, and I will join those together as well. Now I'm going to tongue and groove it, and then I will cut it down the middle. Tongue and groove will give me a relative amount of strength. It will mean that the door itself is strong all the way down through here rather than just having glue and glue. All right, so it's going to have a tongue and groove will actually give me a longer or a bigger gluing surface so that things don't fall apart, and that's part of the reason why I put the butterflies in as well. Okay, so we're going to do all of that sort of stuff. These techniques that I'm doing for this cabinet door are the same techniques that I would use to build the lids of boxes, the larger style boxes. Okay, so the things that I'm learning, or the things that I'm trying to teach you in box making, can overflow into building nice cabinets and things like that. So, you know, it's all good in the learning sphere. So let's have a look at this. So there's my box. I'm really pleased with that, so just put that aside. The camphor that I'm using here is exactly the same as the camphor that I used in the box itself. So anyway, so I've got 10 minutes. I don't think 10 minutes is enough time to actually get things sorted. I could go overtime, but I don't want to do that because that just interferes with other people who are doing shows. Just getting rid of some of this stuff. I'll be needing that shortly. Now, for those of you who are following along, you'll need to get your timber dressed up for your door. Set yourself your feature piece, and that's just wide enough so that I can cut a 10mm tongue on both of on both sides of this piece of timber, and then still cut myself down the middle. Cut a bit down the middle, so it'll still work. So you're not actually wasting very much. And you can choose some nice pieces of timber, and often enough you'll find the timber comes just a small 70mm piece or something like that will be adequate. So let's get to joining things together. So what I want to do first is cut myself a rebate, 10mm rebate or trench down through the middle of that. The router bit that I'm going to use, if you're keeping up with me, there's a number of different things you can do here. So I've got a 4mm slot cutter. I have a 6mm slot cutter, and the one that we sell in our kit is a 3.2. So as you can see, the teeth on all of these are just that tiny little bit wider than each other. Now, if you want to make the tongue, in here very, very thin, well then of course I would go with this one here. If you want to make it a little bit thicker, you can go with a 6mm, right? So that gives you a 6mm, lots of strength. Probably the one that I'm going to go with is a 6mm. And if you have a look sitting it on top of here, you can see that I've got plenty of material either side of the router bit to support the edge that we're going to put on it. Okay, so I'm going to work with the 6mm. The 6mm, you can pick these up from Carby Tool. They're a Carby Tool bit. But the thing that you need to do is make sure that you have a really good fence. Now, a bit dry today, a bit croaky. Didn't get my coffee, Brian. Okay. You need to make a fence that's going to do the job. Because we don't have the fences on here, Rod, if you're watching, we do make fences for things. So, but they all have a particular purpose and they all have a particular function. So, and they're all made for particular router bits. So what we have is 6mm. You can see I've got quite a deep slot in the top edge, and then I've also have a slot down through the middle. The slot down the middle is for the shaft of the router bit. Okay. The slot at the top is for the top part, so it fits in like that. Okay, so it's quite a good technique. You'll also see that the slot down here also extends into the top area of there to cater for the screw on the top edge there. Okay, so that's also important there. So that's how that works. And then you're working with the majority of the router bit is actually contained within the fence, and all sticking out the front of it is the cutter bit, which you have to be very careful of. So half-inch router. Now the first thing I need to do is find myself a centre, and I often use my finger gauge for my centre, and I use it this way. So I've got my finger set here, my finger there, and the end of the pencil there. My finger rubs against the timber. If I turn it around, making sure you don't move that, give myself a nice thick centre line. Or if you don't want to do that, get your ruler out, measure it and mark it with your ruler. All right. Now all I need to do is mark my height, set my height of the router bit. And I'm just going to set it like so. Okay, so if you have a look at that, you can see that that's relatively close to centre. All right. Now, I've got lots of material at the top. What I'll do is I'll cut that first, and then I'm going to flip it over so that it's up this way, and cut it again, and that will give me a perfect centre. You'll see as I go. Right. Now you can see how that's covered up most of that router bit. And I'm going to just extend it out 10 millimetres. So all I've got is these 10 millimetres of my router bit exposed. Lock that in place. So I'm basically now ready to cut my trenches. So what I will do is I will cut the two short ones and show you the trench, and then we're going to stop. All right? I'm going to stop because we've run out of time for a start, but I want to go through the rest of the process, and what I will do is I will build one so that I can cut it in half next week and show you how I actually prep the material to give me my panels. Right? So I have to actually build one off camera, and next week I will build one on camera, show you how it works, and then I can cut away the one I built. I can cut it up and get it ready. So basically that's what I'm going to do. Now, ears on. Okay. Now, important here is make sure you have a push block. I've got just and this is a very simple push block. All I've done is just cut. Showing something off camera. All I've done is I've just cut a piece of timber, just cut a step in it, and all that's going to do is sit on top of there, and I can hang on to it quite adequately. And I'm going to use this piece of timber as my push block to hold it up against the router bit. Okay, so my fingers are right away from the work. Okay, ears on everybody. Now, if you're not sure if that's in the centre or not, and you'll notice I didn't use a ruler, I just guessed a bit, and I guessed where the centre was. All we need to do, so we cut it through that way, so all you need to do is flip it over like so, sit it back on there, ears on. And now you can be sure that it's in perfect centre. All right? And all I have to do now is make myself the tongue that fits into that groove. All right? So I'll do the second one. Okay, so during the week I'm going to make the tongue section for that, and I will glue those 2 pieces of timber together, or 3 pieces of timber together, and I will have that there for you next week so that I can cut it in half for you to show you how I make the frame panels. So we're going to show you that, and on the show I'm going to actually make the other frame piece. This is the verticals, okay, so the struts, and so my 2 rails are there, and I'll get all that sorted for you next week. So have a good week, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed today. We've done a few little things. I hope I've answered a few questions that came up through the week. And anyhow, flip over to Dave if you've got nothing else to do, and we will see you all next week.